I just want to touch on before I get into that. What you just said was founders are notoriously bad at listening to advice. People in general don't listen to advice, right? People will ask you, hey, what do you think of this? And if you don't give them the answer they want, then they'll just, do what they're going to do anyway. Founders are 10 times worse because in order to be a founder, you have to naturally be somebody who doesn't listen to the status quo, who challenges the status quo, who wants to do it their way. So yeah, it's a lot of these things you come back to later and you go, I should have listened to that. But you're not going to.
Welcome to the Unicorn Leadership Podcast. My name is Fadal Tab, and this is the podcast where we interview leaders on the advice that they don't listen to. We interview leaders on how they create high-performing teams and how they become effective in building their business, the insights that they listen to and the insights that they didn't listen to, the tools that they use, the mistakes that they made, then the things they had to learn the hard way. And hopefully you and I can take a few tidbits away and share and maybe avoid some mistakes, but also inevitably make some of our own. This podcast is brought to you by Unicorn Labs, where we transform managers into leaders that create high-performing teams that scale. You can learn more about Unicorn Labs at unicornlabs.ca. Today's guest is Kyle Racki. He's the co-founder and CEO of Proposify. And Kyle helps thousands of businesses remove the bottleneck of proposals to contracts and everything that happens to actually close the deal and more visibility into closing that deal. In true serial entrepreneur form, Kyle co-hosts his own podcast, the Racki and Symes Podcast, where he discusses ideas, strategies to push through growth and likes to discuss a lot of growth strategies. I'm super excited to share this episode with you as his experience and his passion for business, his wisdom really shines through. And he shares some really tough lessons of entrepreneurship. And I believe we talk about the book, The Hard Thing, about hard things during this podcast. But it really reminded me of that book and all the challenging things that a CEO has to deal with. See, the first quote we dealt with that Kyle we shared here in the episode is about listening and whether any of us will truly listen to the advice, whether we actually take it, or we just want to hear what we want. But it interesting because he juxtaposes it against the fact that as entrepreneurs and as leaders, we actually have to be really good at not listening to what's being said just as much as we do at listening. I often have said, imagine our certain world leaders. Imagine our civil rights leaders. Imagine Martin Luther King Jr. took a vote on whether people thought that there should be more civil rights. He would have lost the vote. And the majority of people at the time that he was rallying didn't always agree with that, but he had to rally people who did and foster and mold consensus and mold the people into the way he was thinking. So it's this constant balance of, listen to the customer, what the customer wants so that you can build that. But also don't listen to the customer, because Henry Ford said that if I asked the customer what they wanted, they'd say a faster horse. So listen to the customer, but also lead the customer to where they want to go. Listen to your investors who invest money and time and advice into what your business is taking, but also don't get so obsessed with their advice that you might get stuck in simply just 10xing and short-run decision-making for financial gains. Listen to your team and your employees of what they think needs to be improved, but also have the tenacity to build a vision to take them to where maybe they don't see themselves, because you have the leadership and you have the vision. Listen to gurus online and experts who teach you stuff on podcasts or courses, but also contextualize that and don't take their word as the final word. It has to actually make sense in the context of what you are doing. It is through listening and then dismissing certain things that you've listened that you start to hone in on the filtering skill that's necessary to actually lead in a world of information where you got everyone pulling you in a million different directions. And that is the challenge of a CEO and a leader, where there are far too many priorities and far too many things that you could be doing. And you've got to take a bet on what you should be doing and what difficult things that you are avoiding from doing, and instead trying to do the easy stuff and walk the easier path, because perhaps they're the things that are fastest to do and not perhaps the most important for our businesses. So think about who you're listening to, that maybe you've got to filter. Think about what short run decisions that you're making versus long run decisions that you're making based on what you're listening. And let's hear another quote from Kyle.
I'll say that, like you said, the most founders, I hope all founders, have a certain skill set of things that they're really good at. You might say they're T-shaped. That term gets thrown around a lot in the marketing community. Of essentially, you have to be kind of good at everything and really good at one thing. That tends to be the way most CEOs are made up. Is there, you look at like Brian Halligan from HubSpot. He's not a product guy. He never was, but he's a sales and marketing guy. Most founders will come at it from some sort of either sales and marketing led way, or sometimes product and design, like the Airbnb co-founders were designers. The most common ones in tech are the technical co-founder, which, they all have their strengths and weaknesses, but the business and the company will usually reflect the values of the founder. That's why we talk about core values, and why if you're an asshole, then most people you hire will be, and that's the culture that will be developed.
Yeah. I absolutely love that bit. If you've got too many assholes on your team, I need you to look in the mirror and maybe you reflect, because as Kyle said, if you're an asshole, maybe you're hiring assholes. Maybe the toxic part of your team that you're struggling with is something that we see in our own leadership. See, Kyle got his start in marketing and design, and he ran a digital agency for over 5 years before actually selling it to start Proposify. We discuss a framework that lays out the job of CEO and some of the most important pieces that they're faced with, including things like creating a vision, which we've talked about, but auditing values, building out the executive team, the title politics that are real, making sure that we're not giving out statuses too early, hiring leadership contextually to the current situation, not hiring leadership for that perhaps is needed for a corporate level, but for the size of team that you're on and the challenge that you have. And really being able to understand how not to burn through your cash and not use all up investor money, but survive long enough to be able to see through the business. These are the topics we're going to be talking about in this episode. And if you find it helpful and you enjoy it, send us a note on social media. My handle is Fahad Al-Hattab. You can find us on all social media, or leave us a review on the podcast. Share it with a friend. Give us a 5-star review. And let's get this episode going. Without further ado, let's have this episode number 15 with Kyle Racki get started. All right, Kyle, welcome to our Unicorn Leadership Podcast. I'm excited to have you on our podcast today. You are a fellow Canadian founder, so always love that. You're out in the East Coast of Canada. Kyle, where are you calling in from here today?
I'm calling from Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, which is so close to Halifax that we just call it Halifax. So
just call it Halifax. So I've been to Halifax once, and I'm sure as anyone who's only been there once, we did the classic Peggy's Cove, right? Like that. I was there for a volleyball tournament in high school, like way back, So that's what I associate Halifax with. Dalhousie University and volleyball tournament. That was that's what I associate. Yeah.
So it's grown a lot in the last 10 years. It's I think one of the fastest growing cities in Canada right now.
Oh, really? Where's the growth coming from?
Well, there's a startup scene, but a lot of it. Well, I think the pandemic had an acceleration effect. I think it was already growing a lot over the last 5-10 years, but there's just population growth. There's people aren't as tied to one place. I think historically we suffered because our best people, our best talent would move out to Toronto, Vancouver to get jobs. A lot of people move back here that are from here and want to raise a family here, and they can work remotely. So I think that could have something to do with it. But there's just a lot of new developments and the housing market, you can't find anything.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And what about you? Are born, raised in Halifax? Did you ever leave? You come back? Did you have a story of leaving?
Yeah, I was born in Calgary actually. That was when my parents moved out west to have me, and then they were Cape Bretoners. So that's for those who aren't Canadians. Cape Breton is an island as part of Nova Scotia. But yeah, we moved back to Dartmouth basically, and I've been here ever since.
Awesome. I love that. Cool. Well, Kyle, we've got a fun episode lined up for us because you and I had a chat before this, and you've had a chat with our team, and we've been excited to have you on because you are going to help us unpack the job of a founder, the job of a CEO founder. Especially founder CEOs have to balance quite a bit. And, I often talk about the shift between being a manager to being a leader, right? From just managing kind of the operations and the budgets and the systems to really leading a company, leading people, and really giving direction, giving whether it's elements of vision or really taking bets, which is often what our founders are doing, right? They're taking bets on ideas and markets that they think can grow. But you had a really good framework for us to really understand the job of a CEO and the job of a founder CEO. So tell us a little bit about that, and let's dive right into that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I got this from somebody who was my business coach for a very long time named Dan Martell said this. Because I was struggling as we started to grow our startup. I was, in the early days of us, we wear the label CEO, but really it's just, you kind of need a CEO because somebody's got to do it. But it doesn't mean you're a real CEO. So I always struggle with, how should I be spending my time? What am I responsible for? Especially as you start to delegate the work and you're doing less and less of the actual execution. And Dan always said there's the job of a CEO is number one, set the vision and direction for the company. Number two, build the executive leadership team. And number three is don't run out of money. Financials, keep the finances in order.
Yeah.
And the lens I view that through. Now there's a lot of nuance there, but it's a simple framework.
Of course. I like how you put that. You're a founder, but you're not really a CEO. You don't know what CEO is right now. You're probably just a product manager as you're building out the first product, right? You're wearing so many different hats, and what are the parts of the CEO piece that you have to really think about? And so set the vision, build the exec and the team that can build the rest of the organization, and don't run out of money. So Kyle, I'm a big Dan Martell fan. I mean, I see all his stuff on social media. He is loud and proud, and he's had some phenomenal successes. So really happy to kind of see that connection there. So Kyle, you today are building a pretty cool company. Tell me about the company that you're currently building and that you're currently the founder and CEO of.
Yeah, the company's called Proposify, and we've been around now for 8 years. I think we're kind of one of the earlier sort of B2B document proposal sort of software. So essentially what we do today is we help sales organizations who are scaling and they're starting to lack that control, the consistency of the important sales documents. We call them closing documents. What is the document that needs to get in front of a prospect for them to say yes and for you to close the deal? They might be called proposals or contracts or agreements, but that is a huge bottleneck in a lot of organizations. And as they start to scale up reps, they go, wow, it's like chaos. Everyone's using a different thing, a different template, a Word doc. There's errors, there's pricing, terms are wrong. So what we do is essentially we help them get control over that so that it's consistent and they get visibility into how prospects are interacting with it. Love that.
You've been building that for 8 years.
Yeah.
That's a good time. That is you've gone over many humps, I assume, to get to there. So that's really
cool. In them. Many humps.
Many humps to come. Yeah, exactly. So 8 years building this, and you've had a lot of experience now as a CEO. And so again, we're going to get back to setting the vision, building the exec team, and not running out of money as the three key things. Now, to have learned some of this stuff, a lot of our founders are the type of people, myself included, I'm sure you included. Sometimes we just gotta we can hear it on a podcast, we can read it in a book, but until we're slapped in the face with the issue ourselves, we don't sometimes learn it. So Kyle, take me through a little bit of your own life journey here. Let's kind of, before we get into the brilliant insights, let's give our audience here a chance to learn a little bit more about who you are. Where's your background? What did you do in university or college? What company is this? Is this company 1 or 2? What did you do beforehand? And how did you come to some of the brilliant insights that you're going to be offering us here today?
Sure. Yeah, and I just want to touch on before I get into that, what you just said was founders are notoriously bad at listening to advice. People in general don't listen to advice, right? People will ask you, hey, what do you think of this? And if you don't give them the answer they want, then they'll just do what they're going to do anyway. Founders are 10 times worse because in order to be a founder, you have to naturally be somebody who doesn't listen to the status quo, who challenges the status quo, who wants to do it their way. So yeah, it's a lot of these things you come back to later and you go, I should have listened to that, but you're not going to. It's okay. It's okay.
Yeah. I love that because it's our biggest strengths in the extreme that can be our disadvantages, right? So the perseverance and determination, the stubbornness of a founder to go against the flow is their biggest strength in the early stages, but then is their biggest weakness as they grow and as they scale, right? It's the two. I love that.
Yeah. And then is an advantage later when shit really hits the fan and they have to go against their board or their lead investor, what have you. So it's just interesting insight that you shared there. My background had zero interest in business my entire life. I was always kind of a creative guy, I guess. Like I was into drawing and art and later got into digital art in high school, but wasn't academic enough to really go for, never went to university, went to community college and studied graphic design, which was kind of, I think, what my mother pushed me to, because she's like, well, you like art and you got to get paid somehow. So here's a nice
you can do design. Yeah. That's what loving parents do, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And actually that ended up being a real blessing, because I loved graphic design, and then I later learned web design and then development, and that sort of leads you to building websites and building applications and whatnot. So it was a great stepping stone into that territory. But yeah, I kind of thought I'd work at agencies in my early 20s. I worked at a couple, and we did ad campaigns and billboards and stuff like that, and then we did like websites. So that was like the foray into business, but really it was like I stepped out on my own as a freelancer when I was about 24, partnered with a guy named Kevin Springer, who I met at an agency, who's a biz dev guy, 20 years older than me. And then fast forward 15 years, we're still business partners. So he helped me build, we basically built a web design agency for about 5 years together, and then we killed the agency and started Proposify together.
And what was the leading insight that gave you the aha moment for Proposify?
It was actually one of my first agency jobs. They, a lot of times agencies have to put together these pitches that are very like visually beautiful, kind of, you're selling marketing and advertising services, so there has to be a certain amount of presentation quality to it. But they also are a big cost center, right? Because there's no guarantee you're going to win the work. So they put junior designers on this stuff. Can you pretty up this deck or this template or the proposal, right? So I got involved in the proposal, and I was very fascinated. I had no training or experience in business at all. And this idea of like putting together a document to essentially win, $100K or whatever contract was just fascinating to me. The stuff that goes in it, the pricing, the way you pitch, the scope of services, all that stuff just fascinated me. But it was also very chaotic because I had like account managers emailing me Word docs. This is back in 2006. So we were using CDs and to store our, work that we'd have to pull off to use as case studies. And it just seemed like a real nightmare. And around that time, 37 Signals came out with Basecamp. So everyone was getting on Basecamp. It was like this kind of slicker, like easier way to do project management. So I just one night in my basement thought like, oh, it'd be cool if there was like a Basecamp for proposals, and just design that out in wireframe like a little idea. And that was it. I sat on it for years, but I always kept coming back to like, yeah, there should be like a Basecamp for proposals or like proposal software. And then you started to see like BidSketch came out with one.
Yeah.
There's a lot of quoting tools, but there's nothing that really let you like design something. It was always very like, it looked like what I called like a mechanics quote.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
big giant sheet of tiny text and numbers. It was nothing like creative. So that was kind of the starting point.
Yeah, I love that. That's really cool. That's a, and what's awesome is that, you even see it here. So your initial foray into being a founder and CEO was as a designer and a web developer. Okay, I built a wireframe of like, here's a problem that I saw when I was selling marketing services. And so I built a wireframe about it, and you probably started developing the yourself right at the beginning. And so there's the transformation and the challenge of, a founder who's technical, who's building it themselves, transforming into a manager and transforming into a leader and a CEO, and what that journey really looks like. So how was that journey for you as you kind of started to build out a team? What did building out the team at Proposify look like, and what were some of the challenges? What were some of the wins? Let's start with some wins. What were some of like, hey, I did this well, and what were some of the like, oh my God, this is where I went wrong?
I don't know if the podcast is long enough to talk about what went wrong. We'd have to get really selective. But I'll say that, like you said, the most founders, I hope all founders have a certain skill set of things that they're really good at. You might say they're T-shaped. That term gets thrown around a lot in the marketing community. Of essentially, you have to be kind of good at everything and really good at one thing. That tends to be the way most CEOs are made up. Is they're you look at like Brian Halligan from HubSpot. He's not a product guy. He never was. But he's a sales and marketing guy. Most founders will come at it from some sort of either sales and marketing led way, or sometimes product and design, like the Airbnb co-founders were designers. The most common ones in tech are the technical co-founder, which, they all have their strengths and weaknesses, but the business and the company will usually reflect the values of the founder. That's why we talk about core values, and why if you're an asshole, then most people you hire will be, and that's the culture that will be developed.
Yeah.
But yeah, the strength of a company.
If you're an asshole, you hire assholes, right? Like, it's just because you reward that behavior, right? And you see it in yourself. Yeah.
Well, and the flip opposite is true too. If people are familiar with the concept of radical candor, if you lean on the ruinous empathy side and you won't have hard conversations, you're going to hire other people like that, and suddenly you're going to find yourself with a culture where nobody is willing to challenge, which is arguably worse for a company than one where people are challenging constantly.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I do. It's Remy. I did this fun little exercise. One of the things that we do in leadership development is that we'll often do a personality profile test, just as like a way of getting to know each other, learning a little bit. But what I found over the years is that early on in teams, you could probably guess the percentage of the personality profile in a team based on the personality profiles of founders. Is that we tend to hire people who are, because they're like, oh, that person's just a good vibe. I just connected with them. And really what you're saying is that they're similar to you and they work the same way style you do. So you went with that, right? And so we see that so often. And that's
And that's how most founding teams get started, and that's usually what builds that initial culture that will last for a very long time in the company. And then there's at a certain period of time, you have to reflect as a founder and as an executive team and say, what are the aspects of our culture that aren't helping us get to the next level? And then how do we actually identify and introduce new values to the company that don't accurately reflect who we are today, but tell us where we need to go? So that's what we've had to do at Proposify. We introduced new core values last year that we didn't even follow ourselves yet, because we knew that our current values were holding us back. And I can share examples of what some of them are.
Yeah. So let's get into the kind of the big three kind of framework that you gave us here as part of being a CEO and that we borrowed from Dan Martell. So the first one was you had to build the exec team. How was that journey in building the exec team, Actually, sorry, the first one was set the vision. I got that. Yeah, first one was set the vision. So I find this interesting. We'll talk a little bit about vision. We often talk about vision in these podcasts because it comes down, it is a big part of a startup. And how many times did the vision tweak and change and pivot in your 8 years of building Proposify?
I mean, it changes and evolves constantly. It's one of those things where everybody thinks they know what a vision is, and it's a simple concept to grasp. But a lot of times the simple things are the hard things. And it's, in the case of us, and I assume a lot of startups begin just observing a problem that exists in the world that you want to solve. And it can be a very simple problem like proposals. But as you grow, your ambitions have to grow too. And so suddenly you're like, okay, well, we solved this problem pretty well, but let's step up. Let's zoom out a little bit and see what value are we actually creating in the world, and what do we want to achieve? Mm-hmm. And that can be hard, because not a lot of us, most of us are not Elon Musk, and we're not saying, hey, the vision is to get to Mars or colonize Mars. But in our own way as founders, we have to take some time and reflect and think about what does our own version of getting to Mars look like? It may not be as grandiose as that or as impactful, but what kind of impact do we want to make? And then can we articulate it, more than just a vision statement or a mission statement that says we want to build the best quality products and make whatever 100 million in revenue. How can you articulate that vision in a way that actually gets people out of bed and gets them motivated and keeps people around when they're getting thrown job offers? Mm-hmm. That's the real challenge, and it's simple to describe and very difficult to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Often it's a term that was shared by a podcast member earlier in our podcast, is about the vision is about, we got to polish the turd, is what he said. Initially you get this shitty little idea of a problem that you want to solve with a product that you can do, and you've got to polish it over and over and over again until you get more crisp and clear. And as you said, zoom out. And I think that was a really good piece that I want to hone in on. It's you start sometimes really, really narrow, or at least we want people to start narrow, because you got to pick your niche and you got to pick a very, very specific problem that you can address for a very specific person. And then slowly you zoom out. And it's during that zoom out phase that I think a lot of startups struggle with their identity of where are we going here? If we've only solved this small little problem, how do we capture more of the market without being everything to everyone, which won't help us survive?
Well, let me give two real quick examples, because I know you want to move on to the next piece. But, these are very overused examples, but I think they serve really well to make the point, is that Google and Facebook both have very clear missions and visions that have survived a very long time with these mm-hmm. companies that are, now 20 years old or close to it. Facebook is about making the world more connected. It's not to create a social platform. The social mm-hmm. platform is a way to make the world more connected, but now we can see what Zuckerberg's doing with VR and metaverse. That's another way to make the world more connected. Google's mission is to organize the world's information. It's not to build a search engine, right? But being clear on our job is to organize the world's information enables things like Google Maps, Google Docs, and all the other the good products that they have.
Yeah. I like that. Right. So you can see, you start to see your products as only, tools to achieve the larger vision. Right. Mm-hmm. So good. Okay. So we've set the vision, and where this podcast often, where we get to is, okay, building the team. So, Unicorn Labs, we're a leadership development company. We work with a lot of leaders, developing their capacity, developing their managers, but man, oh man, is it hard. We do it, but it's imperfect. We're constantly working, and we've productized parts of it, but when we coach, we're constantly iterating. At the end of the day, the CEO themselves need to be one of the best coaches for their own teams. They need to build a phenomenal a team that can build teams, a team of teams. And you mentioned that. Tell me about that journey. How was building your exec team? What things did you think about? And what were some mistakes that we can kind of talk about for people to maybe avoid?
Well, these are going to be things that people are going to hear, and it may resonate with them or it may not, but they're probably, like you said at the beginning of this, going to have to make these mistakes themselves. Because as much as you can hear it, until you go through it, it's very difficult to really, nobody's going to get this right, and everybody's going to make a ton of mistakes. what happens at the beginning of a company's life as you build that startup, like you said, who do you like to go out for beers with? Like, who's smart and skilled, and you go, hey, I like hanging out with you. I want you to be on this journey with me. That's how most of these things start. And so naturally what you do is you hand out titles eventually. So, you're a team of 5 people who kind of do a bunch of different stuff. Maybe one person codes mainly, but they're also handling some support tickets, and another person's designing the marketing site, but they're also designing the product. There's these blurry lines. Everybody's just doing a bunch of stuff. But eventually you kind of go, okay, we need somebody to own marketing. We need somebody to own customer support and somebody to own engineering. And the mistake that I've made that you see a lot of people make is they go, well, you should be the CTO and you should be the, VP of product or the VP of whatever. And these are often people who are highly skilled, real like startup people who know how to like hustle, who feel that train barreling behind them, and they're just getting shit done. But those people are probably not in 5 years going to be a person building a 100-person department under them.
Yeah.
Because the skills that you need to be that, if your goal is to scale to $1 billion, the person who's going to build that is probably not the scrappy do it yourself, figure it out startup person. And a lot of them think they want it, and then a certain point comes to a certain point where they just realize that like what they need to be requires more growth than a human being is capable of in that time frame. The business is, once the business is growing faster than the people, you almost always need to layer in management. And if you've handed out these big titles at the beginning, then it leaves no room for layering.
Yeah.
So you have to be stingy when it comes to titles, and you have to say like, I know you're a great engineer, but you're not the CTO. You're going to be the head of engineering for now. And once you get to a breaking point where you can't handle what's required anymore, then I'm going to bring in a VP of engineering or a director of engineering.
Yeah. I think that's so important, right? Like, yes, we hand out those titles, right? Because it's like, oh, whatever, you're CTO. Sure. You want to, oh, yeah, you can be chief revenue officer. You're doing sales and marketing for us. You can. And in the beginning, it's almost, you use it as a carrot, right? I'll give you a title. I'll give you the title. You stay because I can't pay you much. So I'm going to give you the title, keep you there. It's funny because I recall reading The Everything Store about Jeff Bezos, and it's the first one. He has another one now, Amazon Unbound, I think is a kind of the second biography. And the first one, he talks about the exact same thing. They talk about a certain CTO they had who eventually they had to layer someone on top, and that person was so upset. Right. But it just wasn't. And he slowly pushed him out of it. And Bezos' mistake here was that he didn't ever have the very difficult conversation with his exec member. He simply brought other people in around them and slowly pushed them out instead of, properly having the difficult conversation of like, hey, you're not at the capacity we need to build the $100 billion company, the $1 trillion company. You were phenomenal in the beginning stages of getting all of this started. And that's really powerful because it is a different skill set, right? It is a different skill set from being the builder, the doer, or the strategic leader, people manager. So what are some of those skill differences that you take, Kyle? Now, like when you were hiring early execs to when you're hiring execs now that you guys are, I believe you shared with us this probably was over 10 million ARR is what you're at. You have over 65 employees or had maybe some changes going on, but you've really grown. What are the different skill sets you looked for when you were a 10-person shop and now that you've got layers of management?
Yeah, I mean, here's where it gets real fun because it's not. You can't go too far in either direction. So it's about needing the leadership that's required for the business you are today. And so if you're a very early stage startup, you may only need that CTO. Hopefully you're not calling them that, but like you just need that person who's just a skilled engineer. That's all they need to be. They need to build product really quickly and adapt to customer feedback really quickly. There's no sense hiring Slack CTO to come in and like build in all this kind of like automation and infrastructure that can scale to build, millions and millions of users, because you don't need that right now. And so The opposite happens where when you raise money, sometimes startups that raise, Series A or big rounds of investments will get all this cash in the door, and they'll think, now I'm going to bring in the big guns. Now it's our time to scale. And, the book Predictable Revenue by Aaron Ross talks about the different levels of sales leaderships. The highest level is Mr. Dashboards. Mr. Dashboards does not really do a whole lot of stuff other than looking at data and making decisions based on data. You bring a Mr. Dashboards into your startup to try to build the first sales team, they're going to crash and burn.
Yeah.
So a lot of this is about being at the right level of leadership that's required for the business you are today and the next level you want to go to, not 10 years from now, but like, where do you need to be next year? That's the art and the nuance and why it's so tricky to get the right person in for the business you are today. They can't be underqualified. They can't be overqualified.
Yeah. That's I love that. I think you hit the nail on the head here. We were just dealing this with one of our clients who brought in an executive, someone from a bigger corp, kind of a traditional Dell and IBM, and we're super excited to have them. And then the person's like, well, I need an additional 5 people on my team to do this and this and that. And they were like, well, no, we hired you to do that. Like, and the person's like, oh, well, I haven't done that. I usually have a team. And it was an immediate, this is a bad fit. And I say, like, you want leaders who can start fires, not just put out fires. And often when you're in big corporate, you're putting out fires. You're like, okay, there's this problem, there's that problem. You're trying to make the machine run. But at a startup level, right, you want people who can drive the engine.
I always use the analogy of the people who build ships aren't the ones who sail them. And so the kind of people who are going to build a ship are probably not going to sail it. And there's not a right or wrong there. It's just a different skill set. But too often we're at a startup and we need builders and we hire sailors who are going like, hey, where's the ship? Let me take it across the ocean. You're like, well, we're making a ship. What do you mean? Right?
Yeah.
But then once you actually have to sail it, the people who built the ship don't know how to sail.
Yeah. So where has this shown up for you at Proposify? So have you, were you able to not give out titles too early? Did you give out titles too early? Did you have to reel some titles back in? Of course you did. Had to reel some titles back in. How do CEOs have those conversations when it's time to kind of shuffle the deck?
Oh, I mean, they're so hard. They're the outside of like when you've got to lay off a group or let go of a team or a department. I mean, they're the most difficult conversations you're ever going to have as a founder. I mean, if anyone's familiar with the book The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz, he has a whole chapter on how to demote a loyal friend. And I always say to people, if you see The Hard Thing About Hard Things on my desk, shit's about to go down
because I'm reviewing that chapter.
I always reference it. Yeah. But the initial management team at Proposify is completely different than it was. Now versus where we were, the entire team has turned over. There are some people. There's one person in particular who is still at the company and has been with us for 8 years, but she has a different title and does very different jobs. She's not at the executive team. Others have been demoted, and we've had that conversation of like, I don't think you can do this. I don't think you're at the level we need, but you're really good at this thing. And, the execution work, you should just keep doing that. Usually it's they move into an individual contributor role. Right. This happened with our product leader and our engineering leader. And then other times you just straight up fire them. And that's an equally hard conversation, which is like, I don't even think you're a right fit for the company anymore. Or I don't think you can take a back seat. I don't think you're able to. I think you need to just move on and find something else.
Yeah. Wow.
There's no art or formula to having those conversations other than to, appreciate them. Hey, and sometimes these happen as a founder. You're a little bit mad at the person, right? You can't help but be a little bit pissed off because you feel like they've. Hopefully, you don't mind if I swear on this podcast.
No, swear. We swear often.
Good. It's hard not to feel like you really fucked this up. Like we missed our goals, our product shit, our revenue targets are off, and it's your fault. And it's your fault, my fault as the CEO for putting them in place, but it's also their fault for not, like if your marketing leader, your sales leader is not hitting their numbers, they can't blame people on their team. And that's the first sign of somebody who shouldn't be in that position.
Yeah.
Well, your team sucks. We'll get a new team. That's like, I'm relying on you to fix this.
Yeah.
A lot of times people aren't mature enough, or they're just not developed enough to take that level of ownership.
Yeah.
But when you have this open discussion, you have to temper that anger and frustration and disappointment with appreciation. I appreciate that you helped get us here. I know you're trying your best, but it's not enough. And I need somebody who can do it. And I need somebody who looks more like X, Y, and Z. You're not that person.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to be hurt, and there's going to be hard feelings.
Often you don't know what X, Y, and Z are. You don't know what kind of player you need until you've had a player in that role who's taken a few shots, and you're like, oh, those are the wrong shots. I see it like now, dating, right? Yeah.
It's like dating. You learn who you're a good fit for by dating people, and then knowing who you're not a good fit for.
Yeah. See, you mentioned, so you mentioned something good, and I want to get to that piece. Is that, if your team is shit, well, I expect you to fix your team because I hired you. I'm responsible for you, right? And then you're responsible for your team. And so this concept of team of teams is constant that we talk about in leadership. And it's like, yeah, as a CEO, your team that you've got to really worry about is your exec team. That's your starting five. And your starting five have to be able to hire their starting five and have to be able to create their starting five. What do you do to empower the creation of teams to really give them the ownership? Because you mentioned, yes, at some cases, people need to be able to take on that ownership themselves. So there's a little bit of individual skill. But at times, CEOs also struggle with giving that ownership and that empowerment. And there's usually a little bit of that struggle. So what do you do to give that space, give that ownership so people can build their team of teams?
Yeah, great question. And you said something at the beginning of this that I think lends itself towards this, which is you have to learn how to be a coach. And a coach is not an advisor or a consultant, or they're not the person who has the answers. There's two things here. So the first is you have to measure them by results. You're not measuring them by their own individual performance. If anybody who's read Andy Grove's The High Output Management, he says that a manager's output equals the output of their team that reports to them. So if you're a sales leader and you have a sales team, it doesn't matter how great you are, how many deals you close. If your team is responsible for a number and you're not hitting it, then you as a manager are not performing.
Yeah.
I don't care how great your cultural values are or how happy your team is, you're not hitting the number. So when you start putting together a scorecard, and this is probably one of the most, I think, practical tips that people can do this if they don't already, is like an executive team needs to, on a quarterly basis, set the benchmarks for where they want to be based on the vision. You know, where are we going in the future, and then how do we get there? What are the steps we need to take, and how do we measure the success? And then on a weekly basis, you're reviewing that scorecard and being like, sales, here's the top 3 metrics we care about at the company level. How are we doing? Are we on track or off track? That's really, I mean, a lot of this stuff is mundane, but that is what it looks like.
Yeah.
It's just on a weekly basis, how are we doing on the number? Now, what will happen on one-on-ones is your somebody on your team you'll meet with, and if things are going really well, that's great. But if things aren't going well, and they usually aren't, at any kind of company, you're almost always trying to, you're projecting these big numbers and coming up short, then it's a why. So why are we off? And this is where you as a CEO can learn and start to develop those coaching skills, because you might feel you know exactly why we're off. And in a wartime scenario, you probably should just step in and say, this is the answer. You're missing it. This is what we're doing. But you have to, as much as possible, try not to give them the answer, because the only thing that can happen is either you're wrong, in which case they're going to be mad at you, right? Like, you told me to do X and it didn't fix the problem. Or you're right, but you basically you disempowered them. You took the wind out of their sails. You stepped on their toes. You told their team, don't listen to this guy or this gal.
Yeah.
Both of those things aren't good. So you have to, as much as possible, say, why are we off on the number? Okay, it's this problem, it's that problem, it's this other department. This other department isn't doing anything. Somebody else on the executive team isn't giving you what you need, or And
Hey,
then
isn't it always sales blaming marketing, marketing blaming sales, engineering blaming
blaming
sales,
everything.
engineering blaming sales for selling things that aren't yet built, customer service blaming sales for over promising. It's the exact same blames that we see across every organization, right?
And this is an important point: is that a sure sign that somebody is probably not in a good fit on the executive team, or they're just not mature enough, is when they default to blaming and sort of pushing across the aisle to a different department.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those things where it's just like with individual contributors become managers, they struggle because they want to still do all the work. They don't want to
Yes.
like lead the team and like hire the people and give them the processes to do it.
Yeah.
A manager to a leader is the similar type of gap.
Yeah.
Where you've gone from being like, my team matters, all that I care about is my team, to now you have to make decisions through the lens of what's the best for the business. And this is where leaders really struggle because they still have that manager mindset. Well, I want budget for my team. What does the business need? Well, actually, we need more engineers, not salespeople. Here, take my budget. That's what a real leader will do.
Yeah.
Most managers won't.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. You know, the analogy I like to use too, because I think it's sometimes very clear, is like in a sports team, you've got your team members, you've got your captain who's still on the floor shooting the ball, but he's a captain. And then you got your coach who doesn't step on the floor. He can't shoot for you. And so often you get team leads who become managers and they struggle between being captain or coach. And am I captain? Am I shooting the ball? Am I in the trench with my team? Am I telling them what to do? Am I doing the sales call, or am I coach? And do I have to step away and let them do the sales call, and then I watch game tape with them? And that's a tough transition. And so you see that same transition again from manager to leader. You could say coach to GM. Are you just the coach of the team, or are you managing the entire process of the franchise? Right? Like, and again, it takes that next level. So I like that
separation, and the higher the level, the more future focused you are.
Mm-hmm.
Right? At every one of these rungs in the ladder, your outlook becomes longer term, not just what's happening next week or next month, but what's next quarter, what's next year. It's like Bezos said, like, if anyone ever congratulated him on having a good quarter, he'd say, well, it was decisions we made a year or 2 years or sometimes 3 years ago that led us to that quarter.
Yeah. I love that. Good. So then this gets us to kind of the final piece here. We talked about vision. We talked about building the exec team, some things to think about really, we talked about making sure you don't give out statuses too early, right? Titles too early, where we can shuffle people around, making sure that we are hiring leadership that's very contextual to the situation that we're in, and not, get a whole bunch of money and hire what we think are big shots, but they miss the mark. And really leaning into some difficult conversations when necessary, and holding people accountable, really high ownership with scorecards of, do you own the results of your own department? And if you really own it, you can create those team of teams and really empower. So that's kind of really, really good thoughts here you're giving us. So then the last part of this framework is we got to make sure we don't run out of money. And this one I think is really timely. We're in an interesting place in our economy, right? We're in a recession or not, whatever, all that debate that's happened in the US. We're in a recession. I was an economics student back in university. You have all the signs of a recession. We have high interest rates, and you have consumer demand dropping. So let's just call it for what it is. It's been more than a decade since we've had a recession, since the Great Recession, 2008. Pretty much every decade we have a recession. That's based how our economy is to kind of really clean things up. So right now, the conversations around the table around not losing money and not running out of money is some of the biggest conversations that founders are having, more than they've had to in the last 10 years in a bull market where you could just go and raise more money. And what's interesting, Kyle, I mentioned this earlier, is that, as someone who works with a lot of startups, I get to see a lot of different financials. I get to kind of, be on the outside. I'm constantly looking at the markets. And what's interesting is I am really worried because I see a lot of really high headcounts without really high profits. And it's this grow at all costs mentality. I think you had a word for it, throwing cash at growth, or what did you say earlier? You had a word for it when we grow. Burning to grow, right? This is the mentality that we've had over this last 10 years. And it's that, borrow money, raise money at all costs to try and capture market. And sometimes we haven't earned it. and we haven't earned the right to get the referrals, and you can't buy referrals if your product's not good enough to get referrals. Your marketing spend can only do so well if it's not converting in its unit economics, because you aren't solving a problem. You have all of these things where we think we can throw money to solve it. So I'm kind of just painting the picture there, and I'm going to throw it back to you. We're in an interesting situation. A lot of founders are thinking about their cash flow situations. What do you do to make sure you're not running out of money, still hitting targets? And you kind of went through this a little bit too, because you guys raised a whole bunch of money. And how did that affect the team? And there's this, really kind of effect that happens when you raise money and everyone's looking at the valuation versus maybe the revenue.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, there's so much there. I mean, I think the whole startup culture around raising capital to grow is inherently flawed. It's a lot of stuff people know. I mean, I talk to a lot of bootstrap founders through Dan Martell's network, where it's a lot of people who have these like very niche products, small teams, profitable, and they grow, reasonably fast, but not insanely fast. And they've probably got the best type of business you could want. But a lot of times they kind of struggle with this like idea of should we raise, should we not raise? Mm-hmm. It almost always will have an impact, probably negatively, on the culture. And that's even if you get great investors at the table, because like you said, it sort of creates a mindset and a culture around grow at all costs, but also every problem can be solved by just hiring another person.
Yeah.
And that kind of mindset, once it gets in there, it's very insidious, and it sort of starts to infect the whole team. And then later, if you realize, you know what, I like the VC train is a train that's very difficult to get off once you're on it, for a reason. Because number one, you've set the expectation that we're going to double in size every year, and we're going to burn cash to do so. Which obviously, you set yourself up with this ridiculously high valuation that you almost can certainly never fulfill. And then once you've done that, you kind of have to decide, okay, well, if we've missed our targets, we can either raise again at another valuation or at a down round, which means we give up more equity and things that aren't great for founders and shareholders and even employees who own ESOP. Or you can downsize, and you can cut headcount, and you can cut your burn, and you can be okay with a lower kind of growth profile. And that's just hard. Like, it's easy to raise cash and start hiring because people get excited. Like, employees don't look at the balance sheet or the income statement. They don't care. Just look, oh, we're hiring. That's a good sign. The flip side is that if you ever go like, oh, that person left, guess what? We're not going to backfill them. We don't need somebody in that role. Every time you make those decisions, they get seen through this lens of like, oh, we must not be doing well. Oh, are we in trouble? And so it's very hard to get off that train once you're on it for that reason, because you've set these expectations that hiring equals success. Right?
Yeah. It looks like Sean, you jumped back in here. Is everything okay? We've still got a few more minutes. Kyle, we'll just keep going. I think sure. We're recording audio anyway, so it'll keep going, and we'll just cut this piece. Yeah, I think that gravy train is there, right? Like, you're right. As soon as you start sipping from it, you keep having to go back to it, and you keep having to raise another round, and you're looking at buying growth. Yeah, I think you've said it so well. And it's addictive. It's alluring, right? So all the founders that you're talking about who have a great business, but they think, well, I could solve this problem if I just had more money. I could solve my problems if I just had more money. That's the I think the instinct that every human has, right? Even as individuals, you're like, if I make more money, I'll solve all my problems, right? If I get more money in my company, I'll solve all my problems. And
what
we
they
run
don't realize is that it's the constraint and the requirement for discipline that's actually making you perform better as a company. Like, if you just have carte blanche, hire whoever you want tomorrow, and you can just go and hire, 100 engineers, that doesn't actually make your product better. Especially when people are coming in, there's a lot of waste, a lot of time spent, just sort of stuck in the mud, and people aren't talking to customers. it's actually in a lot of cases easier to do more with less.
Yes.
And so even though the tendency is to go, oh, if we had that one extra hire, we could do this much more, that one extra hire is probably going to slow down the other people around them for a brief period of time, if not indefinitely. So the discipline, the muscle, like I use this analogy of like bulking and cutting, right? So if people are used to this bodybuilding term, it's the idea that like bodybuilders want to gain muscle and lose fat. And you can't do both of those at once, so you have to go through cycles. There's the bulking cycle where you're putting on muscle, makes you a little bit fat, and then you go through a cutting cycle where you eat a little bit less and you burn more fat and you lose a little bit of muscle, and you just keep going through that cycle. A business, I kind of look at it that way too. If you're a profitable business, you go through cycles where you go, hey, we had a great couple of months, we've got a lot of cash in the bank. Okay, cool. How are we gonna like deploy that capital? Oh, cool. We're gonna hire this person, that person. Cool. And then you get a little less profitable. And so you just kind of keep going through these cycles, and it's a really healthy thing. Venture capital is steroids.
Yes, it is. Yeah, I like this analogy.
It's
okay,
unnatural.
keep going. Yeah,
it's unnatural.
Yeah.
Right? We're going to inject ourselves with cash that are going to artificially make us look more successful than we are. And then we're going to look at a gigantic burn on our income statement every month. And we hope that that is leading to faster top line growth.
Yeah. See, it's so interesting. So, Rade, who is the he's the CEO, co-CEO of Invert, and he was the president of Canopy Growth during when they went public, and he became president afterwards. Bruce was obviously the CEO during Canopy Growth's ride, but he said something very interesting when we were talking to him. He said when we went IPO and we got $5 billion, the issue is that you no longer had to make any strategic decisions, no trade-offs. You could do it all. You no longer had to choose between path A or path B. Do both. And when you don't have to make those choices and you don't have to make those trade-offs, you're no longer strategic. We're just going to do it all. And I think what makes startups successful is that they choose a little piece of the pie and they go all in on it, and they build a better product than the big legacy software who's doing it all. And that's why we have these, right? I'm sure there are proposal softwares that are embedded within larger sales softwares, right? That are probably shitty and not as good, but they're like, it's a feature within a larger product. But you slice it out and you make it on its own, and suddenly you've made such a more, better product. But because you had to make strategic decisions and say, we're not going to play in this area and we're not going to play in this area. We're going to play in this one area. But you get venture capital and you say, we can play in all the areas because we have all of it. And that he said our biggest mistakes was when we started to get the money, and we made every single mistake along the way. He's like, before then we were doing so well. We had a game plan. We had a clear vision for what we wanted to, and that vision became blurry as soon as we got capital.
Well, so that's why a lot of these bigger companies, the successful ones, have like skunkworks type of divisions that they can go off in these little areas and not impact the core business, right?
Yeah.
Look at the you can Google the graveyard of Google products that killed, because Google would have essentially done the same thing. Here's like a million things we can do because we have the size and scale to do it, but 90% of it or more is trash.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think one of the, you talked about scorecards, and I think one of the key metrics for us to really consider as we, I'm hearing some background noise. Is that Sean, even though he's muted? Sorry, it was no. We're good. We're good. No, it wasn't you. It was some weird. Come back to, so one of the key scorecards to tie in kind of your team executive piece, scorecards, and I think not burning cash. One of the things I think that a lot of founders don't pay enough attention to, but should start. And it's difficult because it goes against some of the growth at all cost thinking that happens. But it's the idea of revenue per employee and that ratio. The reason Google does so well is Google has the best revenue per employee ratio. Their ability to bring in so much dollars and their smaller headcount allows them to have all these skunk work projects. And I think oftentimes in tech, because our revenue doesn't come in till, it's a really long tail kind of effect till you get your hockey stick potentially, right? You're not looking at revenue per employee because you are injecting cash and trying to find that product market fit. But I think if you're going to claim that you have a product market fit, you should really start to look at revenue per employee as a ratio and see how that ratio does, to be able to keep it as a scorecard to say, am I burning too much, right? What's my burn rate? So what are key metrics that you look at when you're looking at this? Make sure I have enough cash. Obviously, we're looking at cash at hand. You're looking at some cash flow metrics, but not every CEO is an accountant and knows all the, understand the profit loss sheet, maybe a liability, statements and so on and so forth. But what are key metrics you look at for this piece of your CEO role?
Well, this is why it goes back to the I think the broader theme around the job of the CEO, right? And because one of those jobs is don't run out of money, it doesn't mean you need to be a financial expert. You can have you should have a great CFO who's kind of your defense, your offense, their defense, and they're kind of helping you and challenging you and doing all the compliance stuff that you need to make sure is getting done. But at the end of the day, if the call is we need to raise or we need to grow or we need to shrink, the CEO can't outsource that decision. They have to be the one to make that call, and I think that's important and worth calling out. Now, how you track this stuff, I mean, there's a lot of metrics that we can use. Headcount per employee, I think, is a really good one because especially if your goal is to be profitable. And in today's economic environment, even companies that have raised cash probably are moving towards profitability as an outcome that they're striving for. One that I learned recently is really good is burn multiple. So if people aren't familiar with that is, a lot of times when you think about these sort of metrics that aren't real financial metrics, they're more of like business, operational metrics like LTV or CAC payback, like how many months does it take to pay back the acquisition cost. These are kind of imperfect metrics because they don't give you a real sense for how you're doing. Burn multiple is really good because it basically looks at how much net new ARR did I bring in during this time period, let's just say quarter, and how much did I burn to do that. So if you're a company that's trying to grow fast and you're not trying to be profitable, you can still maintain a very healthy burn multiple because you might be burning cash, but you're also bringing in net new ARR. So it balances out. Right. So if you're at a kind of a 1x burn multiple, that means like for every you spend $1, you make $1 back. Yeah. What you see a lot of times though are companies that have these very unhealthy burn multiples that are like 3 to 4x. So for every $1 they spend during a quarter, let's say, or a month, they're spending 3 or 4 times the amount that they actually get back in new ARR.
Huh. Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's a number that really kind of keeps you in check and holds you accountable.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's a really good tool for our folks to use. Well, Kyle, this has been a lot of fun, a lot of learning. I'm learning a lot through this conversation, and I think it's very timely for us to be able to talk about, what it means to be a CEO and a co-founder during these difficult times for a lot of our startup founders, and really taking their jobs and learning to be those coaches, to be those CEOs, right? Everything from setting vision to building the exec team to actually auditing those teams, and as you said, really making sure you don't run out of money. So with that said, any last thoughts, Kyle, that you want to share with us today?
I don't think so. It's been a fun chat, and I appreciate you having me on.
Thanks, Kyle, for being here. This is a pleasure for us. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle, so much for sharing your insights with us, for giving some of the cold, hard facts, the raw truth, the difficult conversations of holding people accountable, the lessons and the amassed wealth of experience that you have in everything that you shared with us. Kyle is based out of Halifax in Canada, and he's won a number of awards: EY Tech Entrepreneur of the Year for Atlantic Canada, Deloitte Fast 50. He's gotten all of those, and despite all the awards and all the accolades and that he's done, he has got this really humble way where he's still very grounded in sharing the difficult lessons of a startup. And I really appreciated that. So thank each and every one of you for joining us on this episode, for listening all the way through. If you've got any questions for me, you got any questions for Kyle, feel free to shoot me an email, fahad@unicornlabs.ca. That's where I'll always be. And that's it for today. Thanks for tuning into our episode. You'll find our show notes and transcript over at unicornlabs.ca/podcast. And if you like the content, make sure to rate it, make sure to share it, make sure to subscribe, check out our newsletter for more information. And I'll leave you with this one question. What difficult decisions have you been holding off on? What difficult decisions in your startup have you been sitting on, avoiding, unable to move? I want you to really think about that. The hard thing about hard things is really confronting what is making us uncomfortable, but also confronting what will actually move the needle forward, and whether we can put some attention and time towards that. So what hard decisions have you been avoiding? Thank you, and that's all for now.